In this video, guys, I want to talk about bringing stops up to break even. Stay tuned. Hey traders, warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining me. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about bringing stops up to break even, or even bringing stops up tight. Because the issue we have with stop losses is that we know that they've got to be wide enough to accommodate the noise of the market, right? We can't have them just chopping you out on a little bit of noise. We also know that we don't want them too wide. I don't believe that you can have any longevity in the market if you're using, say, 150 pip stop and looking for a 20 pip target. At some point, if you're wrong a number of times in a row, it's going to take you an awful lot of times to get that money back. So I don't believe that's the case. Now, listen, I'm always open-minded to any strategy out there. Sometimes I listen to podcasts and watch other videos and read books about strategies, and I think, wow, I wouldn't have thought that worked, and it works. So listen, never ever just take anything that anyone says and think just because they can't do it, it can't be done. But I just don't believe it doesn't fit with my approach either. So the issue you have is stop placement, okay? And we've talked a lot on videos. I've done a lot on the whiteboard where we've talked about other ideas of placing your stop, whether you're going to put your stop above a high, below the low, trail it, etc., etc. But there's one thing that comes to mind quite frequently, and that's bringing the stop to break even. Now, a lot of people say, well, break even's irrelevant because at the end of the day, the market doesn't care about where you got into the trade. And that is 100% correct, right? The market does not care where you got into the trade. And by bringing the stop to break even, you're effectively ignoring the trade thesis, right? And I think that's correct. However, there's something else to be said for bringing the stop to break even. The psychological relief that people get from break even stop is why they do it. It's not they're bringing it to break even because technically that's the place on the chart. Okay, it might happen from time to time, of course, but there's always probably going to be a technically better place to put the stop than break even. But break even then changes the dynamic of the trade for a lot of people. And so you have to consider whether that influences trading positively. Because ultimately, guys, if we're trading purely a machine-like trade, then we don't have to consider emotions. But we aren't. We're trading as humans. We're trading from a human emotional perspective. And sometimes we do things for our best interests that might not be logical, but they are the correct thing to do. Example, if you've had 3 losing trades in a row, and you know that 3 losing trades in a row often makes you angry and revenge trade, then you just don't trade anymore. You wait until that emotion has passed over and trade the next day. Now, that's not a logical thing to do. That's not a technical thing to do, but it's the correct thing to do based on emotions. You've got 2 inputs into your trading, the emotional input into your trading and the technical input into your trading. I'm kind of being rough about this, but you get the idea. There's technically correct things to do and there's emotionally the correct things to do. And you've got to kind of, I think you've got to weigh up the two. There's some times where doing the technically correct thing is the right thing to do, and sometimes doing the emotionally correct thing is the right thing to do. Now, of course, some people swing from one place to the other, right? Like they're taking profits too early. They're not using, doing all the things is based on an emotional thing from a wrong perspective. But then there's some times where you've got to know what your strengths and weaknesses are. And so bringing a stop to break even can bring out the best in a trader, because if you don't bring the stop to break even, many traders still consider that there's risk on the table, which there is. But of course, we can go to the dynamics of, whether the risk, unrealized profit is still money you've got, etc., etc. But forget about that for now. The issue then may well change somebody's psyche and way they hold a trade and their emotional state into a more positive state that's conducive to higher profits. So whilst technically, yes, bringing your stop to break even doesn't make any sense, but emotionally, if that then relieves some kind of stress or changes the decision-making process for the trader for the better, then over the long term, that's the right thing to do for that trader. Now, the thing is, if you bring the stop to break even, many people say, okay, well, that means that I don't care what happens to the trade now, whereas if I've got my stop and I've still got some risk on the table, I care more. And I get that, I understand why people think that. I think that you're either one or the other. I don't often bring my stop to break even much. Sometimes I will do. I'm not saying I rule out completely. Sometimes I will do, depending on the trade setup. If I'm not comfortable with the trade and it's kind of just creeping along, and I'll go, listen, I don't want this thing, but I'm not going to cut it. Let me just pull the stops, break even and see what happens. And that is me releasing the pressure of the trade. I don't really want it. Should I take this 15 ticks? Should I take this 25 ticks off the table? You're dicing around with it. Sometimes you just put a stop to break even, just leave it, see what happens. And sometimes you get a little runner, sometimes you don't, but you don't care because the dynamics of that trade are different. Other trades, however, I might be up, 50, 60, 70 ticks and go, listen, I still need the stop because of the nature of the market. I'm looking for 400 on this. I'm prepared to come back and stop me out, or whatever the case may be. So, but I have more kind of thought about the trade, I have more confidence in the trade, etc. So that's from my personal perspective. So really the kind of stop placement, guys, and bring it to break even is this, is that if it works for you and you have the data to kind of prove that, then stick with it. If you're constantly getting stopped out, then maybe you need to relook at it. Now, you don't need to get rid of it completely, but perhaps you need a bit more juice in the trade before you do that. Perhaps you can ratchet it half and move your stop a bit. Maybe that gives you that emotional confidence and clarity that you get to break even, but not leaving the whole stop. So let's say you got a 50 tick stop, goes your way, you pull it down half and get 25 ticks. Maybe that alleviates some of the pressure, or maybe there's another way of doing it. Maybe if you need the ability or need that feeling of taking the risk off the table, you scale out the position. So you get 25 ticks, 25 pips, you scale off half, you bring your stop up. So effectively you're break even, but you still got that ability to dampen out some noise. Another final thing I want to talk about, guys, is that if you bring your stop to break even, you have to be prepared for getting stopped out more often than not, because by the nature of you bringing the stop, just from pure odds perspective, if you're bringing down the stop on your short trade, you are likely to be stopped out more often. Now, that's, if that doesn't offset your losers, in other words, if it all works out in the wash, i.e. your winners, your break evens, your losers, that's fine. But what you don't want to be doing is getting stopped out of break even on really good trades. Now, that's a sacrifice you might be prepared to make on a few trades in order to have the emotional satisfaction, if you like, if that works for you, of having no risk on the table and being able to run something. So this is really, something to think about. There's pros and cons with doing it. And if the pro is that you get relief from the trade, you kind of feel comfortable with running the trade, then that's a really positive thing to do, because otherwise you're snatching at profits anyway, and you kind of reduce the whole point of having the trade. If you're snatching at 15 ticks, whereas if you had to stop at break even and you let it run or whatever, I'm using kind of small numbers here, but of course if you're swing trading, it could be many more multiples of that. But the point is, guys, is this: it's about looking at not only the logical argument for it, but also the emotional argument for it, but also understanding that there's not one right or wrong answer. There's positives and negatives to both. If you bring your stop to break even too soon, you're going to get stopped out early. But if doing that improves you able to run 1 out of 10 trades and just not care about it and walk away and have winners and the environment's right for it, then that offsets it. But not bringing it to break even might be that it causes you to panic out of trades quickly. It causes you to worry about trades that are coming back. It changes the dynamic of the trade too much. Then, you've got that side of it. So the point is, everything, guys, is that, markets are very dynamic. We've got to adjust to the market conditions. Sometimes stop to break even in a noisy market is suicide. Sometimes when it's in a nice trending market, it's the right thing to do. Sometimes it's the right thing to do for you emotionally, and that also varies from how you're doing. If you're doing really, really well, you might not be concerned about giving back some money. If you feel like you're really risk averse or you're not quite in tune with it, you might be more concerned, and that's something that only you can judge. And whilst I'm not a big advocate of adjusting your trading style and strategy so much based on how you feel, I still believe that you have to take note of that. You can't force yourself to do stuff against your will for so long. There's only so much you can do about that. There's only so much you can say, and you're just not going to take trades. You're not going to feel comfortable holding trades to fruition. If that's the case, then do what you need to do to get yourself in that zone again. And if that means capping the risk quickly and putting up with a few stop outs that would have gone your way, then so be it. There's not one right or wrong answer. We're dynamic the way we feel. The market is dynamic the way it operates. Your P&L is dynamic, and so it's adjusting the style and strategy to suit all those things as best we can. So anyway, guys, I've gone on a bit about this, but I feel quite, I I feel quite strongly that there's no right or wrong, and I've talked about this a lot in my videos, but I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to anything. You know, I think that it's like I said, the multiple variables we've got to deal with, not only from a market perspective, but from the other things I mentioned, mean that sometimes you've got to do things that aren't the right thing to do on paper, but they're the right thing to do for you in that moment in time. And one person will argue one side, one person will argue the other. Two very intelligent people will argue the same thing against each other, and you can see both sides of it, but sometimes it's not black and white. Sometimes it's grey, and that's trading. All right, guys, take care. What are you doing? Keep the risk managed, whether you're pulling that stop to break even or you're leaving it wide. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.